I love art. From Monet to Magritte, I have always and will always love art. And because of this, it should really come as no surprise that my favourite syndicate in Project Moon's world is The Ring, the group made entirely up of schools of art directly inspired by real-world historical movements. Now, seeing as an Intervallo heavily focusing on The Ring just came out, it is the perfect time for me to go on a massive art rant. I mean to talk about the real works and schools of art behind the ones we see in-game, and how those real works have been turned into what we can see in universe. Definitely not just an excuse to talk about art history. As of writing, we only know of 6 schools, and from those we've directly met, we know even less. But that doesn't mean I can't talk about the insane amount of real-world inspiration that can be drawn on to make each school unique, or how those that we know use their inspiration in a way you might not be expecting, except for Corporism. We'll get onto them later. But without further ado, allow me to welcome you all to the real Ring. The date is May 15th, 1886. The 8th and ultimately final Impressionist exhibition has just opened at the Rue Lafitte, Paris. Many of the most notable painters of the movement, such as Monet and Renoir, have decided to exhibit elsewhere, but they were never what we were here for in the first place. No, the piece we're here to see is one that doesn't belong to this exhibition at all. The style is new, with the artist Georges Seurat dubbing it Divisionism for its scientific application of separated colour on canvas. Basing his works on the newly developing colour theories at the time, he believed that the colours would blend into a single shade within the eye, and produce a colour more brilliant than any other could at the time. We will end up knowing this technique by another name, however: Pointillism. The work on display here is commonly regarded as the foundational work of the piece, and one of its most famous, A Sunday Afternoon on Le Grand Jatte. It is an oil painting and measures about 2 by 3 meters or 6.6 feet by 9.8. It is a marked departure from the Impressionism practice at the time, trading the realism and simplistic beauty for a more vibrant, almost cartoonish look. Light plays a major role in this piece, and almost all pointillist pieces that will follow on from it. The work itself is brilliant, and although pointillism as a technique of art has now all but died out in serious application, it does have a few technical successes in our everyday life: colour screens and printers. There is one important correlation between pointillism and the way printers achieve a full range of colours with only 4 inks. And that's entirely to do with how our eyes perceive light. Simply put, we blend. The eye contains 2 types of photoreceptors, photo meaning light and receptor being obvious. These 2 are cones and rods respectively, with cones making up just 5% of the photoreceptors in your eyes, with the large bulk of their density in the very centre focal point of the eye. Rods are extremely sensitive to light, and by sharing nerve output channels, even the smallest amount of light can be taken in and processed, at the cost of a blurrier image at the end. Cones, meanwhile, need more light to activate than rods. However, they have one important distinctive feature, and that's what's important to us here. They allow us to detect coloured light. To be more accurate, your eyes have 3 types of cones that all work together. One for the blue wavelength of light, one for the green wavelength of light, and one for the red wavelength of light. All of this information is then passed on to the brain, where RGB values are compared to come to a conclusion of what colour should be registered in a given area. Obviously there aren't actual tables that are compared against, but it's simple enough to just say that as an answer. This system is what both monitors and printers abuse to generate their colours. Monitors use a 3-colour system, red, green and blue, whilst printers use a 4-colour system, cyan, magenta, yellow and key, a fancy way of saying black. The difference is rather simple. Whilst a digital screen can emit the colours of light it wants to, a printer can only absorb wavelengths of light. Because of this, cyan, magenta and yellow are used, each of the 3 absorbing one of the 3 primary colours the digital screen could instead simply display. This technique is fundamentally what the pointillists were going for with their work, although the rudimentary style they used only leads to partial optical blending in the end. Now, that scientific tangent's all well and good, but what does any of that have to do with anything? Well, it's now time for me to talk about how the real-world pointillists inspire Project Moons. We can see from both Leviathan and Canto 6 of Limbus Company that the Pointillists are researchers as much as artists, with the former appearance showing them conducting research into mirror world technology, and the latter showing a group of former Pointillists working under N-Corp to carry out their experiments on the base form of humanity. According to Ring Yi-sang's Uptai story, the group even approached him and offered a place among their ranks. Considering he would have only ever been a researcher at the time, this shows what their main interest would be in the type of person they want to join their school. Sadly, we don't have much more to go off when it comes to the Pointillists, lacking even a singular artwork we can analyse against our real-world Pointillists. So with that, it's time to carry on our story. The year is 1896, and an unknown art student is visiting one Jean Roussel at Belle-Île-Brittany. Russell was an impressionist painter who was friends with many famous artists of the time, most notably being a close friend of Vincent van Gogh. The art student may not know it just yet, but he's about to be introduced to a whole new way of looking at the world, through the eyes of bright, impressionist colours instead of the dreary earthen palette used by the more realistic arts of the time. This student's name is Henri-Émile Benoit Matisse, and he will soon become the founding father of Fauvism technique. Fauvism as a technique is far simpler than Pointillism. The key criteria is for brushwork to be wild and erratic, with a similarly vibrant and often nonsensical colour to match. Rather than constraining themselves meticulously to accurate colours or shapes, Fauvism simply paints a vague and potentially entirely fabricated view of what subjects there were in front of them at the time. But why the name Fauvism? Well, rather simply, it comes from another insult by an art critic. The year is 1905 and Vaucels, an art critic, has just begun viewing the works of Henri Matisse and many other soon-to-be Fauves. The use of colour, brushwork, and choice of topic are so far distinct from what passes as art that critiquing them at all is almost a waste of time for him. However, one thing stands out to him. In the centre of the room, there stands a Renaissance sculpture by the artist Albert Marc. Its clean and elegant beauty at odds with the pure cacophony of coloured noise surrounding it. He has only one phrase to describe it: Donatello chez les Fauves, or Donatello among the wild beasts. This phrase would be printed in a popular daily newspaper of the time, passing into popular usage afterwards. Although looked upon unfavourably at the time, Fauvism is looked upon quite favourably in modern times, with much of the public appreciation for art having shifted towards Impressionism as a whole, a situation that couldn't be further from the truth at the time. The movement itself would end in 1908 after scathing critique and an inability to find recognition amongst other artists or the public at large. As a pure technique, it would continue beyond 1910, but we won't be following them into that period. We have a movement far more influential that evolved directly from the former Fauves: Cubism. Before we move on to the most influential artistic movement of the 20th century though, we need to take some time to talk about Project Moon's Fauves. Most obviously, Project Moon's Fauves have an obsession with their namesakes: wild beasts. This makes up a majority of the art we see from them, the stitched together carcasses of beasts, killed and turned into trophies. In Project Moon's world, their name is taken far more literally, with each Fauvist needing to find animalistic aspects to take on as their own, be it from a mask alone to more permanent changes. Henri Matisse himself also shows up during the most recent Intervallo as I write this, twining threads. They only use their two middle names, Émile Benoit, and play the role of a Fauvist maestro in the story. Additionally, they seem to be the only Fauvist who actually engages in Fauvist design style, with pastel strips reminiscent of later Divisionist work hanging from their antlers. The art these Fauves produce is considerably different than that of our worlds, being closer to taxidermy than anything else. Although calling them taxidermists does undervalue what their movement aims to create somewhat, the basic theory they operate on is that every person has a certain animal kept close to their heart, be it a dog, a goat, an owl, etc, etc. Look at the enemies in this Intervallo if you want more references. Fauvism is about finding that animal and infusing it into your work. We can see from the elaboration on grunt enemies and in Rufo Rodia's Uptai story that switching from this inspiration is supposed to be a great taboo, and indication that you're flittish with your desires. To be le fauve in this world is to become the animal within your heart, and to infuse that animal into your work. The only exception to this that we're told is Emile themselves, who apparently continually finds new obsessions, and yet somehow still develops their fervour with the technique from each new discovery. Unfortunately, as interesting as that technique sounds, it isn't really reflected in what art we can actually see in-game. The works on display in the gallery are uninspired at best, and shoddy patchwork jobs at worst. The only place we can actually begin to see this inspiration come to life is in how they fight, favouring attacks that suit their animal of choice. All in all, despite their interesting manifesto, I personally find the art of our world's Fauves to be far superior to that of Project Moon's. Maybe if they showed off something more interesting than a simple put-together animal, my opinion would change, but for now this is truly nothing but butcher slop. Before we move on from Fauvism, I'd like to ask you to consider liking the video and subscribing. It really does mean a lot to see, and lets me know that more detailed videos like this one are what you want to see on the channel more often. This is a massive diversion from my usual more gameplay-focused content, so it's really good to get feedback on whether or not it's actually the sort of thing that people want to see. That's all of your time I'll take though, so let's get back to the video. Cubism's impact on modern art cannot be understated. It is responsible for modern abstract art, collage, Suprematism, Constructivism, Futurism, Distilge, and more, including one of my personal favourite architectural designs, Art Deco. If you have ever even remotely looked at any sort of modern-day Impressionist art style, you will have seen the hand of Cubism at work. With that in mind, surely Cubism plays a major role in what lore we currently know of the Ring, and yeah, no. We actually have about 3 mentions of them total, and none of them really talk about what they do other than a practically word-for-word description of what Cubism actually is in our world already. So, how exactly am I supposed to talk about the real-world movement and the effects on Project Moon's Cubism if I don't actually have any of Project Moon's Cubism to talk about? This problem doesn't actually end here, as with the exception of Corporism, all of the remaining movements in the video don't have any in-game information to go off of just yet as to how their movement will be adapted into the city. Instead, I'd like to propose a different idea. I'll go over the remaining real-world movements and say what I think will be adapted from their actual school of art. There's a fair chance I'm entirely off the mark with what I suggest, which is why I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you think each school will be adapted to down below. Discussions over these sorts of things are always interesting, so I'm looking forward to seeing what you all think will end up happening. If looking into the real-world movement and trying to think of how that would actually be reflected isn't exactly your speed, this entire video is timestamped, and you can just skip ahead right to Corporism right now. But if you're meaning to stick around, let's begin. In a departure from our previous 2 schools, Cubism doesn't owe its name to an insult or demeaning title, but a simple descriptor of one of George S. Braque's works as a painting made of little cubes. This would go on to spread, with his next appearance's works being described as cubic oddities. Picasso's works, meanwhile, were also developing towards Cubism in this time, with paintings such as Les Demoiselles d'Avignon or The Reservoir Hortet de Ebre becoming some of the first commonly agreed upon Cubist paintings. I've probably mispronunciated those, but I've probably mispronunciated every bit of French in this video, so you know, please forgive me, I'm British, not French. By 1911, only 3 years after Braque's little cubes were first described by critics, Picasso became known as the inventor of a new school, Cubism. Braque's importance in founding the movement would only be later recognised by modern historians. Unlike Pointillism and Fauvism, Cubism held one trait of major importance. It was popular with critics and the public during its movement, and because of this, Cubism's prevalence as a movement lasts far beyond its predecessors, only really beginning to die off in the 1930s, almost 3 decades after its inception. This results in another interesting variation in Cubism. It has historical epochs. There is debate about what these groupings are, with some arguing for 3 phases of early, high, and late, others for the 2 of analytic and synthetic, and yet others still trying to divide Cubism into proto, early, crystal, and late. While the actual dividing lines between these eras is arbitrary, the changes the works themselves see is anything but. Even from the same artists, the work at the start of Cubism compared to its waning days is dramatically different. And because of this, actually talking about what Cubism as a movement attempts to do is rather hard. which probably plays no small part into why Project Moon hasn't actually adapted it yet despite its popularity. But if I was to attempt to sum it up in a single sentence, it would be this. Cubism attempts to encompass. What it attempts to encompass varies heavily from artist to artist, with earlier works encompassing space and volume, quickly evolving into encompassing time, duration, colour, and even perception itself. This is in part what makes it so influential. This is Cubism, but so is this, and this is too. Even this is, in part, Cubism. So how on earth is Project Moon supposed to incorporate this? Well, I would say we can turn to what little we have to guide us on what Cubism could later become. A small talk between Ring Otis and a Cubist member of the Ring, and the knowledge that Callisto takes inspiration from their techniques too. Ring Otis' story shows that the Cubists in this world also focus on depth like our own, deconstructing their subjects and putting them together again to showcase their message. This is likely also what Callisto inherits from this school, the separation of the material in question before reconstructing it otherwise. From here I would argue they both rebuild their parts into something more than they were originally, merging parts both from the original form and others into one major work. But if we just stopped here, then they would just be Corporism again, and as we know, Corporism is not popular whilst Cubism still very much is. So I think the work takes this one step further. I think they incorporate latter stage Cubism, namely time, into their pieces as well. This wouldn't be the first time we've seen the Ring make use of a Wings facility for their art, with the Pointillists using N-Corp's nests for their research that we see conducted in Leviathan, and it also wouldn't be the first we'd see of variable perception of time, considering T-Corp's entire method of business. By altering the perception the work has inherently, or affecting each part in different ways, you could be left with a whole that encompasses far more than simply putting together parts with their muscles and bones on display like Corporism. As such, I'd like to propose a work of art as follows. You could dissect multiple people into their constituent parts and apply different experiences of time to each one of them, before rebuilding them into one whole, and patching up whatever differences remain with prosthesis. Have a rich brain attempt to order around a musculature system operating on a poor person's time budget. See the effect of a system where those responsible for the actual production of the resources, the hands, feet, digestive system, are treated like scum, whilst those who strictly benefit from it, the brain and heart, are left with all the spoils. By creating such a display, not only would you encompass literal three-dimensionality and time into your work, but also a microcosm of the city playing out within a single body. Or they could just make robots, I'm really just spitballing, honestly. Moving away from my recorded interview to join the Ring, we have Blaue Reiters and Suprematism. These both have far less importance in the world of art compared to Cubism, with Blaue Reiters actually being the only Ring school to belong to a loose publishing network of artists instead of a whole movement. Blaue Reiter focused on a sense of spirituality in art and how a spontaneous, intuitive approach to painting should be promoted to the masses, and Suprematism drawing on this and Cubism, aiming instead to purify emotion into base shapes. This results in some novel works, which, according to the manifesto of Suprematism, aim to exist in and for itself, without things. Yeah, if you like Suprematism, no hate to you, but I don't quite get it myself. Still, with no actual information to go off of, any guesses I can give will be entirely dependent on, you guessed it, guesswork. Suprematism will likely abstract works into their purest forms, which is reminiscent both of K-Corp's singularity and what the new League of Nine Littérateurs did in Heathcliff's Canto, but it remains to be seen how that will manifest itself. And Der Blaue Reiters will likely operate as more of a Pinky-esque group, making up a group of like-minded artists spread across the city, rather than a few inherent salons. Still, that's all of the real-world movements covered. So it's time for us to turn to the massive elephant in the room, Corporism. There is one major fault at the heart of talking about Corporism's real-world roots, and that is the simple fact that it, as a movement, doesn't actually exist. And I don't mean that in a, oh, it was around for a year and most artists don't recognize it. I mean, it literally does not exist as a movement, it never existed as a movement, and was never even close to existing as a movement. Kind of. The name itself comes from the old Latin translation of the body, corpus. Corporism naturally focuses on the body and how it can be turned into a work of art. For the most part, this is really just cutting someone open and stitching them back together again with their muscles on display. Callisto makes a massive deal about how he's showing the human condition by cutting people open and immortalizing their screams into his work, but I have to say his work is really uninspired and drab, simply rearranging organs and calling it a day. In effect, he's even worse than a taxidermist, because really all he's doing is a vague autopsy, and not even a good one at that. But it is still a movement of the ring, even if I think the artwork it puts out can only be called art after you're drunk enough to call an elephant a mouse and believe that Mariachi Sinclair can actually provide anything of substance to a sinking team. So, keeping in the spirit of the video, I should talk about where it derives its inspiration from. Whilst not belonging to a real movement, it seems to draw quite heavily from body art, specifically that of extreme body art. Many of these artists turn themselves into the medium, like we see in both Callisto and Albina's cases. For obvious reasons, I'm not going to show any of these works on screen because I like making money from my videos, but if you're interested, a Wikipedia page does exist that you can look up, just major content warning, as you would expect from people turning themselves into art, with the caption extreme body art. It really does say everything on the tin. Additionally, Berlin's Body Worlds Museum bears a striking resemblance to Callisto's work, being made up of real plastinates, bodies of humans and animals cured in resin to prevent them from rotting away. The cost of entry sits at a moderately expensive €21, or about $25 for my American audience. So if, unlike me, you don't think Corporism is simple butcher slop, you can go pay it a visit. And with that, I've exhausted everything we currently know about the Ring and their real-world counterparts of each school. I hope you've enjoyed my little rambling about art history, and maybe enjoy the Ring more than you did going into this video. Or not, both would definitely make sense. As I said before, if you did enjoy the video, please do consider subscribing. It really does mean a lot, and as I said earlier, helps me know that this sort of video is something you want to see in the future. Additionally, thank you to the members. I couldn't make these videos without your support, so all the help is appreciated greatly. But with that said, I'll see you all next time. Good morning, good evening, and good night. Try not to get turned into a work of art yourself in the meantime.